talk about that. Hey, Boulder, do you remember the brown cloud? 20 years ago, that was a very visible demonstration of air pollution. Driving to Golden, looking east, it looked, quote unquote, like a layer of tar paper hanging over Denver. Well, due to increased emission standards for cars, restrictions on wood burning, and other environmental regulations, the brown cloud is significantly and dramatically reduced. But air pollution, this time on a global scale, is a subject that you, yes, you, are going to be asked to vote upon. Yep, right here in Boulder. This November, there's probably going to be a referendum asking your permission to allow the city to pursue the idea of creating local control of electricity generation, perhaps even owning and operating its own utility. Why? Because some folks want more of our electricity to come from non-polluting sources, so-called renewable resources, like wind and solar. That viewpoint asserts that Xcel Energy is not moving fast enough into renewables. So the city of Boulder should take it upon itself to accomplish that goal. Our last show here on Deliberate Conversations was on the current status of renewable energy. So go online to Channel 8 to learn more about renewables. It was a very interesting subject. But today, we're going to look at municipalization. I promised I'd say that 50 times in front of my mirror. It's a mouthful to say, but it means a city becomes its own electric utility company. We're going to look at two other cities that decided to become their own utility. Las Cruces, New Mexico, where our guest, the former mayor, will tell a cautionary tale. And in the second half, we'll talk to the city manager of Winter Park, Florida, where it did work. But first up, Bill Matisse. Bill is the former mayor and city councilor, as well as the 2010 Citizen of the Year for Las Cruces, New Mexico. Bill, you've been involved as a Citizen of the Year and more. You've been involved with this municipalization. I still can't say that well, but you've been involved in that for almost 20 years. Why did Las Cruces even broach the idea? Well, what were they trying to accomplish by looking at that?
Well, you know, at the time they were trying to do the electric takeover, the marketing, I call it a marketing scheme, was to promise lower rates. So, you know,
so it was lower rates, reduce costs.
And reduce costs to the constituents. Could they deliver that? That's why it failed. The deliverables were impossible.
So is that a way of saying that it was not going to achieve lower rates?
No. Because what basically the city wasn't, I'm finding out, you know, working with the mayor and working with your city councilors and having that meeting today in Boulder, that you're doing probably better homework, you're trying to do better planning for the takeover of the electric company, and hopefully you could reach this renewable energy formula that you want, and at the same time provide stable rates for the voters.
Well, I think that, you know, that's the big issue. I think there's universal agreement, I mean, everybody, Las Cruces, Boulder, that, look, we want to go to a more non-polluting form of electric generation. That isn't really debatable. But I think that issue is cost that's behind all of it. I mean, how much more is it going to cost? And
you know, Ralph, that's where the two cities are the same, and that is expenses. How much will it cost to buy this company? And then not only the cost to buy it, but to maintain it and operate it as a government-owned entity.
Now, when you say buy it, you're talking about the grid, the distribution system, the wires that run down the street. And do you have a sense of how's the price set on that?
Well, the city of Las Cruces assumed that it was going to be anywhere from 50 to 60 million. When all the dust settled, and then the courts came in and decided what the fair value was, it was 150 million. So here we did a bond for 95 million, and we had a shortfall. So then that's when the city started to say, maybe we cannot afford to buy this utility company. And that's what Boulder's going to have to find out.
So there's no set cost for the grid. I think you'd have to assume that you know, Xcel and the city are not going to agree. And so it has to go to a third party. I believe that currently, because this was 20 years ago when Las Cruces first embarked on this effort, I believe that it goes to a panel of judges in the state to determine the value of the distribution system. and I guess that's lawyers. But there's also stranded costs, and you had some experience in that.
Yeah, that's what jumped it up from 95 to 150 million, because there was a $53 million stranded cost that wasn't in the formula when we asked for the voter to come forward and approve the bond.
Would it be fair to characterize stranded costs as the revenue that the utility would not get because this amount of power generation went away? Of course, utility is regulated by the Public Utilities Commission in that state. And in this case, it was a formula that it was going to get so much. Well, we're not going to get that. So the utility gets compensated for the loss of that customer base at stranded
That's exactly what it is. It's a private entity that is with shareholders. A public entity has constituents,
right?
They're residents.
You're referring to the utility now.
But they're not profit sharing. In other words, as it's publicly owned, you're not getting a dividend check. So now the shareholders of Xcel are going to have some damaging impact. And what the judges are saying is this is the income lost to that particular private company, and it has to be paid.
I think FERC comes in, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission weighs in on this too, but it's certainly going to be a debatable point. But those would be two of the costs: purchasing the grid, and then stranded costs. And I understand in Las Cruces, one of the differences was back then it wasn't established that a city could buy its own grid, but I believe now it is. That isn't a debate anymore. Now it's a matter of figuring out what the dollars are. But there's also the operation of that utility. Cities operate water utilities. Why not electricity?
Well, that's interesting, because do you use third parties? In other words, if you are going to buy the electric company, are you going to outsource it for sending out bills, operating electricity, and is that another cost? Where are you going to buy your power? Even though you own the grid, you're just buying the distribution of power, but you still need to buy power.
Is there a market out there? I mean,
it could be Xcel
market. True.
I mean, you could turn around and buy wholesale power from Xcel, the company you're deciding to divest from, or another provider.
Would you happen to know, and not that you would, but would you happen to know what the market rates are out there? Or are they set? Is it a competitive market? Does Xcel sell it?
It's actually a competitive market, Ralph. Just like the city of Las Cruces buying natural gas, you just have to go to the market and find out what the wholesale rate is and go with the best provider. So you now have to have what they call an analysis. You're going to have staff. You're going to have a utility director. You're going to have to outsource the operation.
For the city to operate its own electric utility. Of course, they'd have to staff up for that, but presumably that money, of course, comes from the ratepayers, those of us that flip switches and pay bills.
Exactly.
And there's a certain profitability that the city would enjoy that Xcel now enjoys. So why not?
Well, you're hoping that. In other words, anytime a business is sold, you have seen where you just assume that the same revenue is going to come in to pay down the debt. You do a lot of assumptions. You're assuming that if you borrow, whether it's $300 million, $400 million, $500 million, plus the interest, you have to retire that debt, and at the same time you have to do all this extra work of outsourcing, billing, wholesale buying, and so you have to factor those into that so-called profit that you believe Xcel is making.
So now in the case of Las Cruces, due to costs, they backed off.
Well, because we didn't do a very good plan. You're doing a very good plan. In other words, I see the scenarios. I talked to a gentleman with the city, Jonathan, and they're going to actually analyze the best and worst scenarios. Like, what if you don't have any more growth in the city of Las Cruces?
Well, you must have looked at that in Las Cruces.
We did not.
Oh, you didn't?
No.
Oh, okay.
We did not.
There were no projections? Wow.
They were rosy. In other words, we had really nice scenarios from the consulting company, and the consulting company is saying, do it, do it.
Well, sure, because well, wait a minute. If they're consulting, you would think that they would be giving you the best advice. That's what you're paying for. But you seem to characterize it as they were saying, do it, do it, do it.
Yeah, because these were consultants for municipalization. They favored a municipality owning its own utility company. So they're going to paint a very rosy picture. And they did.
Okay, and unfortunately, we don't have enough time to do this subject justice, but ultimately, Las Cruces decided not to do it. And what was the net cost to Las Cruces, this effort?
Well, we spent about probably $21 million in legal fees, and we spent probably another $10 to $15 million in what we call lost programs and projects. And we were only returned about 25 million. So we had a net loss of about $20 million to the general fund.
Was this a distraction from other things that Las Cruces was
Other
doing?
priorities were, they were put on the table. Programs and projects like, for example, street repairs, expansion on libraries, they had to be held back because we were fighting this battle. So what it would have cost us in 2000 to do, Ralph, when we did it in 2005, it was so much more money to get it done.
Knowing what you know now, and the world has changed, you know more, do you think that it would be worth taking a look at again?
No, because unfortunately the economic challenges today, you think, okay, banks are good, you're going to make money, you think Wall Street is solid, they're going to make money, but look what's happening today. It's very risky.
Right.
The risks are greater today.
I'm going to ask for your opinion now, and this maybe is an unfair question, but I'll ask it anyway. If you were, to use a famous ex-president's term, the decider, for Boulder, what do you think Boulder ought to do?
Boulder doesn't know what to do because they don't know the numbers yet, Ralph. In other words, they don't know what they're buying. There's a business that they believe is for sale, forced sale. They want to take over this business, but they have no idea. It would be like you going out and saying, just give me an open check on this business. I don't know what it's going to cost. I don't know what it's going to take to operate, but let me buy it.
Yeah. So in our conversation, we're talking about costs. Of course, in Boulder, we're looking to be more environmentally sensitive. Bill, we could go on for days on this. I do appreciate you being here. I want to thank our underwriters, which is Intelligent Office. We're talking about quality of life here because of air pollution. Well, Intelligent Office is in that. And a lot of the information we get comes from the Boulder Daily Camera. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk to Randy Knight. He's the city manager for Winter Park, Florida. I was going to say Colorado. And they did municipalize down there. And we'll hear from him. We'll be right back. You're watching Deliberate Conversations. It's intelligent, relevant, and sometimes irreverent, but always intentional about the issues that affect us. And we're only in Boulder on your Channel 8. Thank you to our most generous sponsors, Intelligent Office and The Camera. Welcome back to Deliberate Conversations. We're now going to talk to Randy Knight. He is the city manager of Winter Park, Florida, and they went to municipal route. Randy, thanks for joining us, and we're doing this in a little unusual way. Randy is in Florida, as you no doubt can tell from your screen, and we're doing this electronically. Don't we live in a wonderful world? Randy, let's get right down to it. Why did Winter Park decide to go the municipalization route?
Well, Ralph, in Winter Park, we had a lot of problems with the reliability. And so there's really two reasons the city of Winter Park wanted to buy the utility. One was to improve that reliability, and the second was to put the power lines underground. As you know, we have a lot of hurricanes down here.
Yes. Now, were you able to accomplish those two goals by going this route?
We were able to accomplish the goal of improving reliability, and we've already put 12 miles of our 100 miles of overhead distribution line underground. So we're well on our way in that regard.
How long did it take the process to occur from say beginning to end? When did Winter Park first start think about doing this, and when did it actually come to be?
We first started talking about it in the summer of the year 2000, and it took us until June 1st, 2005 to go through the entire process and actually flip the switch to municipal-owned power.
And when you did that, I think you probably had to enter into some form of negotiation involved with the utility provider. Did that occur there, and how did that work?
Yeah, we were actually in negotiations to extend the franchise, and we had a couple of commissioners that, rather than extend the franchise, wanted to look at buying the utility. And so we entered into negotiations both for trying to renew the franchise as well as trying to purchase it.
Well, now
but they fought us on that, and we had to go to court.
Well, I think that's kind of a given, because you got a buyer and a seller, and they're not going to agree. Who was ultimately the body that decided what the cost would be?
The cost was decided by a group of 3 arbitrators. Once we went through the court process, they decided that the price would be set by arbitration. And so we had 3 arbitrators that looked at it and set the price.
Now, did the cost come down to pretty much in the range that you thought it would be?
No, the cost was actually a little bit more than we thought it would be, quite a bit less than they said it would be. Our consultant said it would be in the $20 million range. Their consultant said it'd be $106 million, and it came in at $42 million.
And now, you're a smaller community. What's the population of Winter Park?
About 27,500.
Now, in all of these 27,000 are covered under this community-owned utility currently, correct?
No, we actually annexed a few of those after we bought the utility. Probably about 26,000 of them are covered by the utility.
Now, I don't know if here in Boulder, we're interested in having our electric generation come from a higher percentage of renewable resources. Was that a consideration in Winter Park at all, as where the power came from?
That was not a factor at the time. That is actually something our Environmental Review Board and our Electric Utility Board are looking at now, but that was not an issue at the time of acquisition.
Would you have any idea what the percentage of renewable energy sources where your power is coming from? Or what percentage of that are renewables as opposed to what it was previously?
Currently, 0. The contract we just entered into is actually coming from gas plants only.
Mm-hmm. And now, the Winter Park owns the distribution system, essentially. You don't have a power plant in town. You're buying power from other providers, correct?
That is correct.
And the people that you're buying power from, previously you had a utility. Do you buy power from those folks?
Right, we do. Our first contract we entered into right after we bought the system was a 5-year contract, and the previous power provider won that contract. They were the low bid. Mm-hmm. And then more recently, we went out to bid again after that 5-year contract expired, and we're buying about half of our power from the previous provider and about half from another company called Seminole Electric Co-op.
If you factor in inflation and everything else, and are your rates today better or worse than they were prior to municipalization? I keep saying that, the community-owned utility.
Right. Our rates are certainly higher than they were before, but so is everyone's. We use our previous power provider as our benchmark, and we have tracked their rates pretty steadily the entire time. In fact, I looked at it just a couple of weeks ago, and if you'd been our customer versus their customer for the last 6 years, you would have paid about $22 more over the entire lifetime, or over those entire 6 years, being with us than being with them. And our rates sometimes are slightly higher, sometimes slightly lower.
Now, you said 22 years over 5 years, like $2 per subscriber a year?
Yeah, $22 over the entire time, so less than 50 cents a month or whatever that would be. Our rates have tracked theirs. In fact, we tracked them exactly for the first 4 years. If they raised their rates, we raised ours. If they lowered their rates, we lowered ours. And then after that, we broke off and we started adjusting ours independently of theirs, but we still track them pretty closely.
Okay, let's talk about where the power comes from. You mentioned that Progress was the provider, and you purchased power from Progress initially, but now you're in an open market. Is that open market rate less or equal to what Progress charges its other customers? Do you have any idea about that?
Well, the original agreement we entered into was called their embedded cost. So we got the same rate that all their other customers got. Mm-hmm. So that was for the first 5 years of the agreement. This last renewal we did, we actually got a joint venture between Progress Energy and Seminole Electric Co-op to provide the power. We get about half from each. And those come from specific gas generation plants. And we've actually saved a lot of money by doing that.
And of course, gas generation has a smaller carbon footprint than coal-fired. Now, did all of your power that you're buying, is it coming exclusively from gas?
It is currently. In this 3-year contract we're currently in, it's exclusively from gas.
But you mentioned that you're in a process now where you're looking at perhaps the environmental impact of the generation. Is that accurate? Is that what's going on?
Yes, that is accurate. Our Environmental Review Board and our Utility Advisory Board are both looking at ways to use more renewable energy.
Do you have any idea if there is a premium cost on the renewable energy resources as opposed to gas or coal-fired?
I don't have direct information. We have certainly heard people say that it costs you more to have renewable, but we haven't bid it out or anything like that to get a real cost.
Now, going back on the original cost issue, there's this stranded costs idea that you have to pay the utility for the loss of its future business, and they call that stranded costs. In this arbitration that you went through, there must have been a number associated with that. Was that more or less than you anticipated, or how did that work?
It was more than we anticipated. The amount that Winter Park had to pay for stranded costs was about $10.7 million of that $42 million purchase price. So it was more than we originally anticipated.
And so I generally lump these efforts into 3 categories, franchise, localization, or municipalization. And at least from my standpoint, municipalization is owning somehow or other. Well, you couldn't own the generation. Do you know of any communities that do own generation?
Oh, sure. There's a lot in Florida that own their own generation. Orlando, Vero Beach, New Smyrna Beach all own their own generation also.
Mm-hmm. Would you have any knowledge of how that's working in Orlando? And I don't want to get you in trouble down there.
It's working very well in Orlando. They have some of the lowest rates in the state. Mm-hmm. But some of the other cities, the generation has been a real burden for them.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that perhaps is a function of scale? I know Orlando is a much larger community than Boulder. We're about 100,000 here. What's Orlando? Any idea that area?
Orlando's very similar in size.
Orlando's 100,000 people?
Yeah.
Wow.
The greater Orlando area is well over 1 million people, but just in the city limits alone, just a little over 100,000, I believe.
Does that utility cover just the city or the surrounding area?
Primarily just the city for electric. They do some water and sewer stuff also that goes outside of their area.
The communities where you say it isn't working so well, what do you attribute that to, if you would?
I think the age of their plants, as well as the scale, as you mentioned. The others are much smaller communities. 40,000 and below in size.
Mm-hmm. And but Orlando, how long have they been doing it?
They've been doing it since the early 1900s.
Oh, they've had their own power forever.
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay. These other communities, do you know if those are also long-term electric providers, or do you know of any community that's done it recently? I'm told this doesn't happen very often.
We're the first city to do it in Florida since the 1940s.
Aha. And would you have any knowledge of how many other communities have done this successfully around the country? I think I heard somewhere that there were, in your consultant, there were like 6 communities that were considering it, and I believe Winter Park was the only one that actually did it.
We're the only ones in Florida. There's still some looking at it, but we're the only ones that have done it so far. As we were going through the process, we heard of a couple situations around the country. Hermiston, Oregon, I think, was one that had done it. A little bit different circumstances, but we're the only ones in Florida.
Any idea why, I mean, given your apparent success here, why those other communities wouldn't do it?
Yes, it's a tough process to go through. The politics is extremely difficult. Some of the cities, with elections, the incumbent utility got their people in and were able to turn the tide in those cities. In some cities, the city manager got terminated, and so the drive to do it went away. And
so it comes down to politics.
Politics.
Yeah, and those of us in the middle, the voters, we have to decide. Of course, we're trying to figure out how much it's going to cost and what the advantages are. Believe it or not, we're out of time. And I really want to thank both Bill Matisse and Randy Knight for the generous use of their time and their information. And of course, our underwriters, the Intelligent Office and the Daily Camera. This is Deliberate Conversations. You get the idea. We're probably going to talk about this again, but the next subject will also be one that you should probably know something about. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Deliberate Conversations is brought to you by Intelligent Office. How's your work-life balance? Intelligent Office has got some answers. IntelligentOffice.com. Also brought to you by The Camera, Boulder's daily newspaper that provides information literally unavailable anywhere else.